Hey everyone, this is John Houston with CIOTalks, where we bring you interviews with some of the top thought leaders in the tech world. My guest today is John Higginson. John is a Chief Technology Officer for Wheels, where his teams are responsible for, among other things, developing and managing client-facing applications, system infrastructure, and security. Wheels applications serve more than 300,000 business users and process more than 40 million transactions annually. Furthermore, John has over 20 years of technology leadership experience and is an active member and speaker of tech forums such as ACORD LOMA conferences and various CIO summits. John, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
So, John, where I want to start is the concept of Internet of Things. So many experts argue that the Internet of Things has potential to lead to a paradigm shift, similar to how mobile has over the past decade. And I want to ask, do you agree with this statement? And if so, what changes do you expect to see, and how do companies need to prepare for it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a sea change for how we think about technology. And, one of the things that people talk about outside of Internet of Things is this move from the standard IP addressing, the IPv4 to IPv6. And people, I remember talking to people about, the massive numbers of open IP addresses that IPv6 has, and they say, well, why do we need that many? Well, according to Gartner, by 2020, there'll be 26 billion devices that'll be connected to the internet. So yeah, we kind of need some more internet addresses than the ones we have. The reason I think Internet of Things is important is for two reasons. One of which I think we talk about a lot in kind of technology forums and also in the media, and one that I don't see as much of. So the thing we talk about a lot is this kind of consumer-focused ability with Internet of Things, where you can control devices over the internet. So Nest, for example, has gotten a lot of media attention. It's a really interesting product. It was recently acquired by Google. And the whole idea behind Nest is you have this device, which is effectively a computer that it replaces your thermostat, that learns patterns about your house and your preferences, and it will help control costs and for heating and cooling in your home. But you can also completely control it from the internet. You can log on to the Nest application from literally anywhere in the world, and if you forget to lower the heat when you're gone for a week, you can do it remotely. And if you want to know what's happening in your house, if it's too hot or too cold because maybe you have pets there, you can do that remotely too. And we talk about that in a lot of other contexts. In Wheels industry, so Wheels is obviously in automotive and vehicle industries, we talk a lot about being able to get information and remotely control things in a car. So GM, for example, lets you, there's an OnStar application, you can start your car remotely. Mm-hmm. So if you're on the train and you're coming home and you want to start your car in the parking lot 5 minutes before you get there, you can do that remotely through the application. So all those consumer-oriented things are powerful and are certainly a big part of why the Internet of Things is going to be important going forward. But there's another element to that I don't think we talk much about, and that's the data side of it. So if you think about lots and lots of industries today try to provide services based on information which comes either days or weeks or months later than when it actually occurs. And I'll give you an example from vehicle automation, which is, today when we talk about what's happening in vehicles in terms of performance statistics, in terms of driver behavior, in terms of the status of the equipment in the vehicle, typically we get that information either through events that happen. So if there is a ticket or an accident, that's how we know about driver behavior. If there's a repair that happens or kind of normal maintenance, then the technician can actually pull information off the vehicle's onboard computer, and we get that information. But it's very scattershot and it's typically out of date. And there is GPS has been around for a while, and you can get some information off GPS, and companies have done things like geofencing or just tracking salespeople, but that's kind of limited. But think about a world where in real time you can actually not only know where a vehicle is, but know what's happening with the vehicle, know if the vehicle is trending towards some sort of maintenance issue, know if a driver is driving in a way that might be unsafe, where they're making a lot of lane changes, or they're doing jackrabbit starts, or they're short stops. That's possible with the Internet of Things. We're not that far from a world where cars and all sorts of other devices that we use in our day-to-day lives are connected, and we get data in real time. Now, it's a massive amount of data, and we have to have different ways of thinking about processing that data. But when we have that, you can do all sorts of really cool things. I mean, certainly safety then becomes a real-time thing where you can almost, it's almost like Minority Report. You'll be able to anticipate things that happen. And you can even marry it with other data that we have. Like you can marry weather and road condition data to driver behavior and predict when a driver might be at greater risk or warn them about something that's going to happen. And I think that data collection, which we're just really on the cusp of, can be really transformative to a lot of industries. And I think that's true of all of vehicles. I think that's true of travel and airlines in general, just being able to have real-time information. It's true of buildings. You think about being able to get that data from buildings. And you're starting to see people talk about this, and even taking it citywide, even looking at electricity consumption and what's happening traffic pattern-wise in cities, and being able to make real-time, even automated decisions about traffic routing and where police go for traffic or traffic or safety. And I think all those things are possible with Internet of Things as well. Okay. And we're just at the beginning of that.
Okay, so I guess when you're saying all these things, the advantages seem clear, but the obvious drawback is one of privacy and security. So it's great that I can access my Nest from anywhere, but presumably that means a nefarious character could also access it from anywhere. How do you deal with both the security issue and the privacy of people willing to share very personal information with corporations?
Yeah, privacy is really thorny, and the privacy issues, there are many of them, and there's all sorts of data collection that happens passively that I think largely people aren't aware of. I think the average person would be shocked at the amount of information that companies have about just their day-to-day life. In an e-commerce standpoint, e-commerce companies, ad companies, will help e-commerce retailers track what their consumers do on their site. And they can actually build a really complete profile of where you go on the internet, how much time you spend there. I teach part-time in an MBA program, and I tell my students, how would you feel if when you went to Macy's or JCPenney's, somebody stood behind you with a clipboard and wrote down everything you did, everything you looked at, everything you put in your basket, how long you stood there? And they said, no, that would be creepy. And I said, well, that happens every single day online. Right. But it is difficult because we don't have a good sense of how much of that data collection is happening. And from a legal standpoint, there aren't a lot of built-in protections, at least in the U.S., in terms of protecting your private information. So I think that's going to be a tension between what people perceive as the benefit of giving up that information and how much control they really have over it, and the risks of doing that. The security aspect is important too, and obviously it's incumbent upon us in the technology industry as we build these solutions that we do a really good job of protecting that information and protecting access. Because if you think about it from the context of like building controls, as building controls become more online and more controllable remotely, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, doors are electronic. You could lock people out of a building. You could, there's things you can do with the HVAC system. One of the scary things in automated building is halon. Halon is a fire suppression system, but you can't, it's literally takes all the oxygen out of the room it's triggered in. So you certainly don't want that happening. Right. There are people there. I think those problems are solvable. I think in different industries and different applications, we can build good, and we have examples of good security. But as we've seen, with hacking attempts, including Heartbleed, which happened a month ago, you have to really be vigilant, and that really is part of the price you pay. To get all this benefit from having all these connected devices, we have to make the investments in security because the risks go up exponentially.
Okay. All right. And so I want to pivot now to mobile. And specifically from the business side, it's becoming increasingly clear that a business's mobile presence may be just as important as their web presence. How do you craft a mobile strategy that puts you out in front of this movement as more and more people are browsing from their phones or tablets?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mobile, not that long ago, just 5 years ago, was almost non-existent in terms of a platform. There's some very interesting stats. Mary Meeker from Kleiner Perkins, who does a kind of a state of the internet presentation every year, talks about how in 2009, 1% of global internet traffic, 1% of global internet traffic was mobile. And in 2012, it was 13%. And in the U.S., it was actually 37%.
Wow.
So it's just been this enormous explosion. And it's really driven by smartphones because we went from having phones that you could, remember the good old days when you just used them to make calls. Now they're a full-fledged, not only they're a full-fledged computer, but you have all these other things in it too. They're increasingly becoming our repository for all of our information. It's how we track our fitness, and it's even how we make payments. So mobile, because people are on these devices, their attention and the time they spend online is gravitating toward those devices. So, obviously mobile is something that companies can't ignore, and it really doesn't matter what you are. I think a couple of years ago, companies said, well, I'm not in online retail, so I don't need to worry about mobile. But I think the reality is that that's where people are. And so if you're a company, and even if your website is only the gateway into telling potential customers about what you do and what your capabilities are, if you don't have a good mobile presence, you're missing a huge part of your audience. You're basically giving that up without even knowing it. So I think being able to provide content on mobile devices is really critical. It's sort of a non-negotiable thing these days for every company. How you actually develop that presence really depends on what's important to you as a company. So obviously, if you're selling or providing services, you need to think about the right way to present it. And mobile is very different. I think I think sometimes companies, when they move their online presences to mobile, they forget that the user interactions are very different. The touch is very different than click. That not only is it a screen real estate issue, but it might be a performance issue depending on the quality of the cellular networks that people are working with. And there's also, on the flip side of that, there's this rich integration that you can have with mobile where you can actually access their contacts and you can access GPS information. And so you have to think about those things as you build your mobile strategy or build your mobile presence. In terms of creating the strategy, it does come down to what do you want to do as a company? Do you want to make it easy for them to do a service? If you're selling something, you have to make it very easy for them to get to the things they want. Knowing that they're using their finger and not a mouse, knowing that they're not going to type a lot and they don't want to type a lot. So, the old paradigms of, type in a search and you look for whatever you want doesn't really work on mobile. So you really have to think about the user experience and think about your customer or your potential customer. Who are you trying to get? Who's your audience? And what's going to resonate with them? What's the kind of thing that's going to work? And then you have this kind of, which is still evolving, this kind of interesting technology question of, is it a website? Is it a native application?
Right.
And some of that comes down to what kind of functionality do you need? Because there's certain things you can only do in a native application. And it comes down to the fragmentation of the mobile platforms too, because if you go down the native app route, you have more control over the experience and you can do more with it, but be prepared to write and maintain lots of versions for that. Right. Last year I spoke to a group of CIOs about mobile and retail, and I mentioned to them at the time there are roughly four basic resolution types for iOS devices, for iPhones and iPads. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 for Android. So you have to build your screen to tailor to all those different interfaces. Right. And then as you know, iOS updates once a year, Android updates once a year. So you're making a pretty big commitment if you're building a native app. But you do have to think about that, because ultimately if that's the investment you have to make to reach the audience you want, then you have to go down that route.
Yeah. It seems like a similar awakening of maybe 10 or 15 years ago with just having a website. That at first it was e-commerce you needed, then everyone needed it. Now we're sort of repeating that with mobile, and they need to be thought of with different strategies. You can't just copy it over. Okay.
It just doesn't. Yeah, it just doesn't translate.
Yeah.
You actually have to tailor it to that particular device and that audience.
Okay. Well, I want to get one last question in here, and that's about software. We're sort of talking about app development there, but I know software is a huge component of what Wheels does, and something I know you and your team spend a lot of time on. Do you develop all your software internally, or do you find that for some projects it makes sense to outsource it to a software development shop?
Yeah, for the most part, we develop our applications internally, and really because we're a technology company, and it's easy for me to say, right? So what else would you expect the CTO to say?
Yeah.
But if you ask our other executives in the company, they would tell you the same thing, because we provide lots of services to our customers, and those are very critical services. They're all enabled through technology. From the applications we have to the vendor network. You mentioned at the outset, we do 40 million transactions every year. It requires really solid technology in order to do that, and we do those error-free, by the way. We do that many transactions without errors. So it's really important for us to have good technology. And in a company, the best way to ensure you have good technology is to have that competency and have that expertise internally. So it's really important for us in terms of delivering on our core business and our core services to be able to write, control, and innovate in the technology we use. Now, there are other areas of the company where, if the example I used to use a decade ago was it would never make sense to write your own version of Microsoft Word because somebody already has that. And there are other places in the business too where, whether it be helping to track our sales force or other internal applications, accounting software, it wouldn't make sense for us to build a financial planning application. Those are things that you look at the market, you buy, and you integrate. But I would argue, and I think, and this is something I think is probably debated in CTO, CIO circles. I would argue if technology is important for your business, you need to control it. It's good to bring in outside expertise, outside ideas. You want to find all the best thinking wherever you can. But at the end of the day, if your business is centered on technology, you need to be able to own it, and you need to be able to build it.
Okay, so it sounds like definitely for mission critical stuff, you want to do it internally, and then sort of on a case by case basis for sort of the custom purpose driven apps throughout the rest of the company. Is that sort of how you think about it?
Yeah, for the most part, I think if it's something that's a solved problem elsewhere, and it's kind of running some part of the business, it makes sense to go out and find something that's best in class and do that. For what the core business of the company is, if it's for us it's technology enabled. You want to control it. You don't want to compromise your offering or compromise your ability to compete in the marketplace because you're trying to fit into somebody else's definition of what that software should do.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, John, I'd like to thank you for doing this interview and thank all of you for watching. Be sure to sign up in the upper right corner of the site to receive an email when new interviews are posted. Also follow us at CIOTalks on Twitter to stay on top of all things CIOTalks related. And lastly, please submit your recommendation for which tech leader you'd like to see interviewed next. Thanks again for watching. Thank you, John. And I look forward to bringing more great interviews. Thanks.
Thanks, John.